Coming up, Qantas shares hit a record as shareholders meet at its AGM, the market on inflation watch, and we speak with ResMed CEO Mick Farrell. All of that is next. Hi everyone, it's your daily 10-minute business and finance news wrap for this Friday, the 25th of October 2024. It's actually a bit longer than 10 minutes today because we do have a special interview with ResMed CEO Mick Farrell out of the US talking about the company's latest results and implications of AI on the business and GLP-1 drugs. So that's coming up a bit later, along with a market wrap with Isaac Poole from Oreana. But first, we'll start with Qantas because its shares have hit a record high today as executives met shareholders at its annual general meeting in Hobart. The board avoided a second strike against its remuneration report. It also said it continues to see first half trading in line with expectations, that travel numbers are improving. It's launched more frequent flyer seats, while employees will get a small cash bonus. So, is its reputation improving, even as some workers walk off the job? Mahnaz Angury spoke with Upstream Aviation Analyst Tim Collins.
It will be a recovery, but it will take a little bit of time. And, it's all about delivery, right? It's not what you do wrong. It's always about how you recover. So if the CEO is absolutely true to her word and does the things that Qantas has said it's going to do to win back the public's trust, i.e. answer phone calls on time, give people refunds, have competitive fares and be reliable, I think gradually they will win back the public's trust, but it will take a little while.
The Qantas shares being at a record high, how fragile is this and what kind of things can impact this from going in another direction?
Well, it's really a couple of things. First of all, there's always aircraft airworthiness issues, right? So there are quite a few in the airline industry, not for the public to be concerned about in terms of their safety, but in the airline industry, there are quite a few engine issues with quite a few aircraft types at the moment. And some of those types Qantas operates, and other airlines have had to take aircraft out of service because they can't get the engines overhauled or any issues fixed on time. So that has an impact on their ability to meet schedule and obviously on flight availability and ticket availability. So there is some fragility around that. Secondly, the global geopolitical situation, certainly in terms of war and how that affects the oil price and the global economy, also is another fragility. Apart from that, Qantas is a fairly solidly run and well-run business, but every business is vulnerable to recession or those fragile global issues.
And the voting obviously was quite different to the results last year. What kind of things have impacted this change, I guess?
I think it's the passage of time. I think also people want to recognise that the CEO has done a lot to try and change the culture. I think Qantas is genuine in its attempt to make amends, which it needs to be. And I think that people are also quite prepared to say, well, look, we've got a whole load of new board members, we've got a new board chairman, we've got a new CEO. Let's give them a little bit of slack and let them do what they need to do to try and turn the airline around. If you're a shareholder, you'd be quite happy today because your shares are, at a high.
And in terms of, what we spoke about regaining trust, how much of an impact would pricing have on that?
Interesting. I think if people see that they're not being gouged and they see the difference between the tickets of a various airline and they look reasonably similar and they're confident they're not being gouged, I don't think the public have a problem with that. But if they see that, Qantas is 5 times more expensive than anybody else, even though they're operationally excellent, which they are, but so are other airlines as well, then I think that they feel that they're being gouged, and that will go a long way to damaging that rebuild of trust. Remember, you've got different groups of people here. You've got passengers who are, they're the buyers. You've got the employees who are the stakeholders working in the business. Then you've got the shareholders who essentially own the business. And to some extent, they've all got slightly competing requirements.
Tim Collins there from Upstream Aviation.
Now, Market Day on the SBS On the Money podcast.
The Australian share market finished basically where it started today, with the ASX 200 up just by 0.06%. That's 5 points, 8,211. For more, I spoke with Isaac Poole from Oreana Portfolio Advisory Services. Isaac, what's driving the market today?
I think we've seen a bit of an up and down day today, and that's ending a week where we've seen a lot of caution. We're going to end the week lower, and I think that's really just the market in wait and see mode ahead of some important data next week, and of course elections later on in November. So just a directionless end to the week.
All right, so some of that data, we're going to see the official inflation report released next week. The Commonwealth Bank saying today it reckons quarterly inflation will ease to 0.7%, and that would open the door to a potential interest rate cut from the RBA in December. What's the market thinking, though?
The market isn't there at all. At the moment, we're seeing the market pricing a rate cut in next year for the RBA, and not until April. That inflation is moving lower, but I think the RBA has been really clear recently that they are not in a rush to cut rates. I think they've really highlighted that they're probably not going to cut this year. And so the market sitting around April next year seems about right to me.
We've spoken a lot on the podcast about China, the impact of the Middle East and tensions on the share market. But I guess the next real big international factor will be that US presidential election in the beginning of November. How do you see that playing out and hitting the market?
Yeah, it does loom large. And I think as we get closer and closer to that date, we're just going to see a bit more volatility as investors try and trade around the potential outcomes there. And the reality is we're not going to get an outcome on that day, on the 5th of November. It could be a few days until we get a clear result. And so that further introduces the possibility of volatility in the near term. But I think for investors, what's important to look to is the medium-term outlook or the medium-term outcomes. And there, I think it's all about inflation. It's fiscal spending, it's tariffs, and what that may do to inflation in the US. And we've seen government bond yields, US Treasury yields in the US start to drift higher. I think that might be something that could persist for a longer period after the election.
And finally, where do you see the opportunities for investors at the moment?
I do think right now we're seeing equity markets look really stretched in terms of valuations. They're high relative to history, and it's probably not a great time to start chasing the rally that we've seen over the last several months. Instead, as yields have backed up, there's a really good opportunity to lock away some pretty good income there and in very high quality, safe government bonds in Australia and the US. But the beauty of that is it gives you some downside protection as well. If the economy does slow, you're not going to want to be too leveraged to the equity market. You're going to want to be having some downside protection.
Isaac Poole there from Oreana. Now to our feature interview today. That's with ResMed CEO. ResMed makes machines to tackle sleep apnea, and its shares surged 6% today after it lifted quarterly revenue by 11%. Rhanya Bosch spoke with its CEO, Mick Farrell, who was based in the US.
If you look at the market is growing at mid-single digits for devices and high single digits for masks and high single digits in our residential care software. But as you saw in this quarter, we had 11% growth in our US devices, 10% overall, 10% growth in our masks in the US, and 11% overall. And in our software business, incredibly strong 12% growth. So I think the point is that ResMed doesn't just accept market growth. We look to bring more patients into the funnel, to do demand generation. And we also look to help people find that better path to therapy. I'd call it digital sleep health concierge, so that we get demand conversion and then help people find a pathway to a physician, to a prescription, to get onto care. And so we don't just sort of accept whatever the flow of patients will be. We partner with the consumer, if they're coming from a consumer tech or big pharma front, and we partner with the physician, the healthcare system, to make sure that diagnostic, that screening, that diagnostic, that therapy, prescription and therapy management are quick. And that's how we achieved really strong 11% growth across the business.
Mick, we'll move on to talk about the tech side of things in just a minute. But first, I want to address GLP-1s, weight loss drugs like Ozempic. Previously, you have called these a tailwind for the business. Obviously, a lot of people would disagree. They'd say it was a challenge. Why are you saying these are something that's going to push the business forward?
Yeah, look, it's a huge area and people are looking at it very carefully. I think, 15 months ago, there were lots of bets out there saying that these new medications were going to lower so many chronic diseases that a lot of other therapies weren't going to be needed. And the people doing that were just wrong. It was a jump to a conclusion of correlation versus causality and truly understanding the science. And so we've spent 15 minutes sort of explaining the science on the epidemiology of sleep apnea, and that, yes, these new medicines will impact some level of the prevalence of obstructive sleep apnea, but by 2050, there'll still be between 1.2 and 1.4 billion people with obstructive sleep apnea in the world. So, 20 plus years, we've got this huge runway ahead. And so really what it's about is not that long-term epidemiology number, it's about the short-term kinetics. And what we're seeing is that these new class of medicines bring patients into primary care physicians, GPs, like never before. And these people are very motivated and engaged patients. So we are now tracking 989,000 subjects in a de-identified analysis that have a prescription for GLP-1 and a prescription for positive airway pressure. And what we're seeing, and these are the data across this large cohort, what we're seeing is a 10.8 absolute percentage point higher start rate on positive airway pressure for the patients who have a GLP-1 prescription and a PAP prescription. And then you say, okay, maybe that's just a short-term thing. We look at them at 12 months and 24 months from starting PAP. And we're seeing at 12 months, it's 3.2 absolute percentage points higher resupply rate, meaning they're buying a mask, accessories, tubing, all the parts of the ecosystem that you only buy when you're adherent to therapy. And then the curves separate even more at 24 months. And we're seeing 5.3% higher, absolute percentage points higher resupply rate for this cohort of patients on GLP-1s and PAP prescriptions at 24 months. So those data are clear. And we just updated the data on my earnings call, like literally an hour ago with those latest information. And what we're saying is those numbers say it's a tailwind. And you saw our published numbers, not just this quarter, the last 4 quarters. ResMed's growing incredibly well. We're the number 1 provider of this care worldwide, so we're a really good indicator on the health of the industry. Patients are coming in like never before. I was asked on the earnings call by one of the sell-side analysts to really quantify how many are coming from their Apple Watch and their Samsung Watch versus Novo Nordisk or Lilly's advertising and so on Ozempic and Wegovy and Zepbound and all these. It's really hard to quantify exactly where and how people come from. But what we're seeing is really strong flow of patients. And ResMed is there to help them find their path. And when they're there and they got that prescription, we have the smallest, quietest, most comfortable, most connected and most intelligent therapies, Rhanya. And that's how we make sure we take care of these patients long term.
So if not GLP-1s, what is the biggest challenge to ResMed over the next, say, 12 months?
That's a good question. I think the biggest actually challenge is this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for awareness of sleep apnea, sleep health and breathing health. ResMed, we're very proud. We're at New York Stock Exchange. Our market cap's maybe 35 billion. The Australian Stock Exchange, our market cap's maybe 50, 55 billion. So we're proud being an ASX, top 10 and S&P top 500 company worldwide. However, I look at Apple, they're 3 trillion in market cap, right? So we're 1% of their size in terms of the value of the company. And so when Apple decides to put a latest watch with sleep apnea detection on it, it's scaling by a factor of 10x or 100x what we could ever do in terms of driving awareness. So I think the biggest challenge will be if all these patients these consumers, these persons who suffocate, they have their Samsung Galaxy Watch with its de novo FDA clearance or their Apple Watch say possible sleep apnea, moderate to severe sleep apnea, and that ResMed hasn't stepped up and created sleep health concierge, the ability for them to go to our generative AI Dawn chatbot and engage with that as a concierge, or find a pathway to a primary care physician, find a pathway to a GP. Most importantly, find their way to a sleep specialist, whether it's a respiratory therapist or a sleep specialist physician who can take care of them with the best therapy on the planet for this, which is the lowest cost, least invasive, most proven, most efficacious therapy, which is positive airway pressure. And so I think missing out on this once in a generation, these next 1, 3, 5 years, missing out that opportunity is the biggest potential hurdle for
Mick, ResMed is also harnessing the power of artificial intelligence. Now, this is obviously a hot topic at the moment. I guess being a medical firm, how concerned are you about things like privacy?
It's a great question, Rhanya. It relates to what I was just talking about. I was on a panel at Toronto last week at the MedTech Global Conference called AdvaMed, MedTech Conference. And so I was on a panel with the CEO of Smith & Nephew and the CEO of Terumo, a blood management company. And it was led by a person talking about AI and talking about privacy, interoperability, and, what are we doing here? And the gentleman facilitating said that there are 950 FDA-cleared AI medical products out there, but 0 with generative AI. It's all basic machine learning and AI. And I think that's probably where we're at in the medical field for now. This great sort of consumer product, ChatGPT and all the other OpenAI type generative AI is great for asking questions and engaging and where you're comfortable doing it. And as a company, we're applying that internally with all our capabilities and looking for supply chain efficiency, customer service efficiency, all sorts of aspects across the business. But in terms of the medical products, we've only launched 2 to market. We're very careful as we launch our AI products to market. We eat, sleep, and breathe privacy, security, cybersecurity, interoperability, and really being stewards of the data. And that the ownership of that data is the person. It's their sleep, it's their breathing, it's their healthcare data. And so we're very, very careful about that.
What is your take on the AI space and the use of things like nuclear power to push data centers to where they need to be?
I'll just give you the guidance, Rhanya, that I give to my team. What I say to my team is find the most boring part, the most mundane part of your job, and assume that will be replaced by AI, so you replace it with AI. And find a tool that's curated, it's private, it's secure, it fits within our security networks and all our guardrails that we have on choosing AI products, and work with our head of AI to curate a great product, to take all that banal or boring stuff that really shouldn't take that much compute power, and it takes away that boring stuff. And then it allows you as the human who's running this area, whether it's marketing, sales, technology, to think at a higher level, more strategically, looking around corners, looking over that third horizon.
That's Rhanya Bosch there speaking with ResMed CEO Mick Farrell. This SBS On the Money stream is provided for informational purposes only. The content in this stream should not be understood as constituting advice or a recommendation. It is not personal advice and it does not consider your personal circumstances or objectives. You should contact a licensed professional before making any financial decision.